screen at the moment. Caroline is joining us. She is literally just getting some water in case she gets dehydrated during this webinar. This is actually the nicest temperature I've done a webinar in the last 2 weeks, which is delightful because it has been incredibly hot, as Anna and I were talking about earlier, but we won't go into that in too much detail in microorganisms. But yes, welcome to everyone that's joining us today. We will leave a couple of minutes for people to come in, and so that we don't get started too early and people miss out on some key bits. For those of you not familiar with Zoom, I know we all pretty much are now, but if you can just click on your participants tab at the bottom, you'll then open up you can also open up your chat, and if you change your chat, it will naturally be set to all panelists. If you change that to all panelists and attendees, that would be great, because you may have some comments and some questions you want to put in throughout. As you're joining, if you can say hello and introduce where you're from, that would be really interesting. We've already realised that we've got a couple of Caroline's current team, and some of her old team on here as well, so that's great. I'll just give me 1 second. We will get Caroline on with us shortly. So yes, welcome to everyone joining us at the moment, and thanks for coming along this Wednesday. As I said, if you're not familiar with Zoom, just to open up your chat and change the preferences to being able to see what panelists are writing and what guests are writing too. Do introduce yourself and say hello. It's always funny, guys, when I find that there's kind of high value fundraisers are always less inclined to introduce themselves than community and events fundraisers. I don't know whether you obviously manage teams of mixed income streams, but the community and events are always the people that are first on there, like, hello, this is where I'm from. But yes, so today we will be discussing what makes great leadership in the sector. It's obviously a topic that has really come to the forefront over the last few months. I know a lot of organisations have led brilliantly during this time, others not so well. So we are going to be discussing the tips and tricks that Caroline and Anna have been using over the last few months, but also that they've developed in their years of leadership between them. So there should be some really good tangibles for everyone joining to take away. So if you're currently leading a team or you're looking at stepping up into leading a team, there should be some really actionable things to come out of this. Some of you have not been with us before, but I see that there's a lot of familiar faces. So in terms of this webinar series, it's something that we've been running as Ashby Jenkins Recruitment throughout COVID, as a free offering to the sector. Initially, this was and I'm sure we can all think back to those first kind of month where everyone was terrified. This webinar series was there to offer reassurance and hope that fundraising wasn't doomed, just different. And now, as we've all moved into a slightly more optimistic place, and fundraising levels haven't been as dramatically impacted in some organisations as first expected, we're keen to keep focusing on professional development and best practice sharing across the sector. All of the pre-webinars recordings are on YouTube, and I will share the link at the end, along with the link to this recording, so that you can watch it back if there's anything that you missed or anything that we discussed that you want to re-explore. And the webinars we've hosted so far have covered everything from the future of fundraising, using psychology to motivate teams, and how to make our sector more inclusive, which is something that's incredibly important to so many of us, particularly to my agency at the moment. Outside of our webinars, we're also offering training and wellness sessions. So if you have team members that are under a lot of stress, we're offering kind of meditation and yoga sessions as well. So happy to have a discussion about that. However, outside of all the webinar stuff, obviously we are still Ashby Jenkins Recruitment. So recruitment is our bread and butter, and we specialise in fundraising, innovation and digital roles across the entire UK. The market is definitely picking up. For those of you that are joining us that might be job seeking, it's picking up significantly, and we're moving back into a more of a candidate short market. So if you do have any recruitment needs, please get in touch with me at the end of this session. So today I am being joined by two wonderful women, both of whom come highly recommended to me by their current and ex-team members. As I'm sure many of you are aware, people leave their roles a lot of the time because of the relationship or the leadership that they have. So I always take these endorsements very, very seriously when I get them. So I'm delighted to introduce Anna Jones from Campaign Against Living Miserably, and Caroline Gormley from Evelina London Children's Hospital. I had to pause a little bit there. I said that I might mess that up, which isn't great. Caroline, can you hear us at all?
I can hear you, but I can't get my video back on. I think you need to do that for me, Ashby.
I've just given you permission, so you should be able to switch it. There we go. Okay, yes. Lovely. Wonderful. We can see you. That was like a big reveal then. We were keeping you under wraps. I should have brought you all in under secret things. So sorry, Anna, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview initially of your team and what it's been like for you over the last 4 months, and then we'll move on to you, Caroline.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Ashby. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Anna Jones. I've been working at Campaign Against Living Miserably for 4 years now, which has frankly flown by. I joined as a member of the senior leadership team originally 4 years ago, and my current role is fundraising director, which is the longest time I've stayed in a single role. So I'm quite pleased myself from that point of view. During that period, the charity's grown enormously. So we were about 8 or 10 people when I first joined, and our income was 1.5 million. And then now we're currently 40 people, and our income for our draft accounts for last year is 0.7 million. So it's been quite rapid growth. Sadly, I don't think we'll be seeing that same growth this year. We're all having to manage our expectations somewhat. And I had a team of, I think it's 11 people. There's been a couple of changes recently, so I had to count them on my fingers when I was talking to Ashby the other week. And I oversee all areas of our revenue. So we're pretty traditional in our revenue streams. So we cover off corporate partnerships and sort of other ways of working with companies, individual giving, community fundraising, challenge events, and philanthropy, which we encompass as being trusts and foundations, statutory and major donors. The past 5 months have been tough, as I'm sure they have for everyone. The initial response in March was pretty panicked across the board. I think for everybody, it was the word unprecedented got used far too many times, but it really, and there was just no way of knowing what to do for the best at that point. I don't know about the rest of you, but we saw, while Just Giving Income is a really good barometer of how much our supporters are doing to fundraise for us, and we saw that go down to about 1 or 2% of what we would normally see coming through that, which was probably the most terrified I've been in a role as a fundraiser in sort of the last 12 years. So we quite rapidly had to evolve how we were working, and unfortunately one of those first steps that we needed to take was that of furloughing. So in that first couple of weeks, we actually placed a quarter of the organisation on furlough. Obviously that was some really tricky conversations and really, really tough to manage. And as part of what we did before deciding what furloughs needed to be made at that point, we looked organisationally as a senior leadership team of actually what our strategy needs to be at that point. And it was very much, as everyone keeps saying, like a war footing kind of approach. What's the bare minimum that we need to do? And what do we need to improve on, and what can we change in the way that we're currently operating in order to keep the organisation going, and not think about keeping the organisation going in the next couple of months or years, but actually how can we make sure that Calm, in our instance, is there for people who need us in 10, 15, 20 years time. And I think that was really the hardest thing to balance, was the immediacy of needing to make the changes right now, but actually trying to think about what's best for the charity so that we can still be helping people in tens of years time. And in Calm's case, we're relatively young compared to a lot of the organisations I've seen here. We're, I think, 15 years old, I can't actually remember, because we started off as a primary care trust funded campaign before we were formed as a charity. So it's about how do we keep Calm around in 15 years time. And so one of those responses initially was furloughing, and that included a number of people from the fundraising team as well. And then, as you might expect, we saw our challenge event income drop wildly. That typically brought in a third of Calm's income. So we went from previously having a model of fundraising that was the envy of the charity sector, where everything was unrestricted and we had a third of our income coming from challenge events, to there's no challenge events. How are we going to make any money? And then equally, community fundraising just dropped wildly. However, on the more positive end of things, we did see a very quick pickup in our individual giving, and that was due to a really fast change of tactics on Calm's behalf. We had previously said, well, we'll never directly ask our supporters for money. It's not what we're about. We're not going to do that. To going, actually, maybe we need to. Maybe in this instance, that needs to be the approach that we take. So, you know, rather than getting into all the tactics that we've undertaken, like broadly, we had to work out the sort of what our plan was as a senior leadership team and make sure that was communicated to the team. Because in addition, you've got the challenge of everyone suddenly being dispersed. Whereas we're all used to, certainly at Calm, in the office together, working together, thrashing things out together. We then were immediately all at home trying to work remotely and trying to still offer the same support, if not more support, to the teams. And that, I think, was particularly challenging. I think at times it was very easy to feel like, well, we're talking to the team all the time, but what we were actually doing was talking as a senior leadership team all the time, and we're not communicating to the rest of the organisation enough. So we set up fortnightly meetings, which included the team who were on furlough and the team office, to make sure that we're communicating what we're delivering against the strategy and how we were performing against the strategy. And so then we've sort of, as we've come through this initial phase, we're now sort of easing our strategy a little bit, and we've moved into the second phase of the strategy, and fortunately be able to bring people back from furlough now. So that's sort of a whistle-stop tour of a few months.
No, that's great. And Caroline, I know you've had a lot of, obviously being an NHS-related charity as well, there's been a different story for you, but of other challenges. So give us a bit of an overview of your team and what's happened for you in the last 5 months.
Sure, absolutely. And just want to say a quick shout out to, I can see lots of my own team and team from Tommy's, and I think even someone from Leonard Cheshire Disability. So hi to all of those team members. So I work for Evelina London Children's Hospital, which is part of Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation Trust. So yes, we are an NHS charity, and with that though comes lots of pros and cons right now. So let me explain a little bit, I guess, about how we're set up as a fundraising team, because we have a slightly different model to most charities. We are set up in essentially a matrix partnership way with King's College London and the King's Health Partners, which are the academic and medical schools associated with the hospitals in King's College London. So that includes Guy's and St Thomas's, Evelina London. Historically, that was King's College Hospital, and I think I can see someone here from there as well. And also South London and Maudsley, which we still work with. But for the purpose of today, my role is very much focused on Evelina London as part of the Guy's and St Thomas's team. And we have a traditional team across all of the usual fundraising income streams. I particularly lead on the major gifts income stream for Evelina London. We have a trust and foundations team. We have a principal gifts team, which operate at £3 million and above. We have a direct marketing team, a legacies in memory team, and we have events, community, and of course corporate team as well. So we have the kind of the full spectrum of fundraising teams, and we're very lucky to have a very big supporter operations team behind us that fulfill all of the kind of the really necessary functions: stewardship, cultivation, gift processing, operations behind all of the King's College London, Guy's and St Thomas's and Maudsley teams as well. So we were very lucky to be able to draw on lots of knowledge and draw on a much wider team as well during this very stressful time. And all of those teams also ran emergency appeals through COVID. So we were all working really fast, but pulling on each other's learning and experiences as we went. But, you know, very much like Anna, we had to adapt really quickly. I very much remember that Monday night we were in the office and we'd been talking about obviously trialing working from home that week that Boris made the announcement, and overnight we went to working from home and not having the infrastructure necessary that we needed to do that. And so the team adapted really quickly. There were so many great examples of people pulling together, and some having to work on their own personal laptops and figuring out how that would work and dialing in remotely. But very quickly, we got to grips with using Microsoft Teams, which we'd never used before. And And actually, we started to really use Teams to come together and use the technology to come together in a way that actually sometimes was quite difficult for us as a very large team. So across the entire King's and King's Health Partnership team, there's 140 of us. Within Guy's and St. Thomas's and Evelina, that's more around 40 that work on that, those organisations. So sometimes it could be hard to bring us all together because we were at different campuses, different sites, and working on different things. And actually, technology enabled us to come together in a central platform, and there was no worries about finding a room big enough to have us all in one place. So that was definitely one of the upsides. But also very quickly we recognised there was a lot of obviously stress and worry going along with us trying to respond to the public's want to support an NHS charity, as well as providing obviously all of the support and infrastructure for our teams' well-being as well. So we had to balance that really sensitively, really. We saw obviously in the first 2 to 3 weeks a huge outpour obviously of support for Guy's and St. Thomas's specifically. So as a children's hospital, as part of the wider trust, we weren't maybe as relevant in the beginning, but we realised that we knew that our supporters would be worried and much like us and stressed, and that we just wanted to check in, and we engaged with our supporters and made sure that we communicated much like we did across our teams. Whilst we didn't furlough immediately in our team because there was such a need for all our fundraisers, obviously we had to assess that as we went as well. And we did put some on furlough, but brought them back quite quickly because there was real peaks and troughs. And once kind of the first 3 or 4 weeks we got those under our belts, we launched an emergency direct marketing appeal, which much like Anna was, although we had a direct marketing team, it was the biggest ever direct marketing appeal that we did across the entire hospital base. And so we raised over £100,000 from that initial appeal, but actually we started to see real support coming from pockets of the community and funders that actually maybe we hadn't seen before. So probably like lots of everybody else, we did have a Trust and Foundations team, but they very quickly responded to some incoming inquiries that started to reach out as well. And we started to see a lot of support through Trust and Foundations. We also, for the first time ever, I would say, we saw a real influx of corporate support, both in terms of gift in kind, obviously, as a lot of you may have seen across the media, and lots of you may have donated as well. People really wanted to support the frontline workers, but that was not something we were set up to do as a fundraising team. And so we really quickly had to adapt, and real credit to some of the corporate team that are listening in today, adapt their ways of working and work really closely with people on the ground at the hospital, but do it remotely, which was really challenging because I think hands up, and I would say, I would imagine it would be the same for many other charities, but particularly NHS charities. We probably operated in the dark for about 4 weeks because our colleagues and all the stakeholders that we would normally engage with were working on the front line, and they had other priorities, but we knew we wanted to support them. So actually, in terms of motivating the team and bringing us all together, we kept that a front of mind. A lot of our team, we wanted to do something to help, and we knew that actually we just needed to get on with it. And people really rallied together in the team, and we came together and raised over 1.5 million in the space of 3 months for our hospitals, which was really amazing.
Great. Okay, perfect. Well, let's move on to questions, because in terms of, I know there was a few things that I asked you guys to think about beforehand. So I guess in terms of keeping your team positive during the crisis, and I guess just in terms of, I guess, tangible things that you did or steps that you took, Anna, if we come to you first, what did you put in place to keep your teams positive and focused on fundraising rather than thinking negatively? And just taking yourself off mute first, before you go into some great stuff.
I'm going to be absolute gold. I think the first thing I wanted to say on this is actually you can't always keep people positive, and that's kind of okay, because it was a really awful time, and it is. And so I think sometimes in our eagerness to make, certainly for me, in our eagerness to maintain buoyancy and positivity, we sort of run roughshod over what might be some very understandable feelings about what's going on in the outside world at the moment. That being said, I think it's a really key role of any leader to maintain at least optimism, if not necessarily positivity throughout. And the main thing that I think we did was just keeping in contact and making sure that there's enough check-in points without them becoming sort of overwhelming and filling up the diary endlessly. And that was a really key thing, and to legitimize those contact points not just being about work. So every 5 minutes you talk to somebody on the phone or on whatever tools you've got. It doesn't have to be you spending all of those 5 minutes talking about the piece of work that you're doing together, but you can actually call each other up to talk about your dog or your lunch or whatever. Some of the team were really great at sort of contributing in that sort of way. So we set up a channel on our Slack, our instant messenger program, which some of you may have. I can't remember what the Google version is, but there's some similar products out there. I separated out a second conversation, which was just for frivolity. So we had the conversation for the team, which was about work, and one was just called team chat. And that's where, so, you know, I would say, like, who had for lunch today? Like, who's feeling a bit fed up of all of this? Like, I've had a really unproductive morning. How's everyone else feeling? And just sort of using that as a bit of an opportunity to check in and share and be a bit more, a bit less work focused and a bit more how you would normally be when you're chatting to someone in the kitchen or you're bumping into them outside of work. And I think the other consideration we had to was how to keep the team positive who are at work, absolutely, but actually how do you impart some of that positivity to the team who are on furlough? Because that's a lot harder to do, because A, you're not in as much contact time with them, and B, it's probably hardest for them to be positive because they've got the most time to think about all the repercussions at the moment. And that was a really hard balance of how much we communicated with them, because there was a balance between wanting to keep them up to speed so they didn't feel like they'd been left off or didn't feel marginalised, but also, sorry, bad choice of word, but I didn't feel pushed to the sides, but also keeping enough, but also not over communicating to the point that they felt like they needed to be involved or that they were actually effectively still working, because obviously that can't happen. But with them, again, it's about communication, I think, and accepting you're getting a bit wrong sometimes, but keep asking for feedback and really taking the temperature of the room as much as possible.
Right. And do you think, and sorry guys, as we're talking, feel free to list questions as you go through. I know that we've had one direct one, which will come on to the end, Anna, about your IG program in a bit more detail. But guys, feel free to put questions. Anna and Caroline, I'll ask you as well. In terms of opening yourself up more to your teams and being more vulnerable, is that something that you felt you've had to do during this time period rather than kind of being very professional?
I think certainly over the years I've grown to be a little bit more myself, but obviously in a professional sense. But certainly, you know, being where I work, I'm relatively open about my own mental health. So I have long-term depression, but there's again a massive balance between that load on somebody of like, I feel awful, I feel sad, when it's not appropriate at work, versus just acknowledging that it's a thing. So the terminology I would use would be like, my brain's being unkind to me today, so just bear with me. Rather than coming in and saying, oh, I feel awful today, I feel sad, because then that's a bit more like emotional labour for the person that you're talking to. Whereas if it's just a check-in of, this is getting to me a bit, this is quite hard, isn't it? I think that's quite an interesting way of terming it. And certainly, the terminology we tend to use in our team is like, my brain's going to use the terminology we actually use. My brain's being mean is what we'll say for the purposes of this webinar.
We all have those times. We all have those days. And Caroline, what do you think that you've kind of been more personable, less like cold professional? Not that that would normally be your style, but during this crisis to try and kind of keep the team engaged?
Yeah, sure. I think Anna, makes a good point there. It's about bringing, your authentic self as much as possible and trying to balance that positivity with obviously kind of shielding your team, protecting your team from some of the worries that you have, and maybe that, some of the pressure that's coming onto you from trustees and the level above. And it is a fine balance. You don't need to share all of that information, but you do need to communicate. And I would say that was the one thing that we tried to do quite quickly as a leadership team. We came together because of the multi kind of layers within our organization, communicating at every level, both from us as a joint leadership, me as a leader myself, with the director of fundraising. And we started to do, we used all of the tools Anna talked about, we did the daily check-ins and then assessed if that was working. We had team chats, we had different channels, we had social aspects of it. But we also actually have learned, we've done some staff surveys, and we're starting to do more pulse checks as well. So to really understand what this team need and how that's changing actually week to week and now month to month. We've opened up, we are now doing weekly drop-in sessions for each team leader basically within the organization. So I have an hour every week where anybody can just drop in, as well as put something in the diary. And that starts to work really well, because I think in some ways, although that can just be about a chat, some people have come to me about career development in this really strange time. They've also talked to me about actually just some actions, things they needed moved forward, and they maybe didn't want to bring it up in another forum, or again, some personal kind of issues and how they get through that. But really having flexibility, I think, has been really important. I think showing that you can, but allow that flexibility within people's days. So we've said to people, look, if you want to take lunch at a different time, you want to go for a walk, get up and go away from your desk, you want to work different hours, you want to, you can't sleep at night, you want to get up a bit earlier and work like 8 till 4 or do something different, feel free to do that. We've always had that there, but people maybe didn't feel like they could do it. But it's articulating that is okay. And at an organizational level, we've brought in, well, Kings, I haven't been involved in this, but they have listened. We've communicated from our team, some of the stresses and worries. And so positivity, in coming through, well, actually, it's okay to not be okay sometimes. And there's been 2 well-being days brought into Kings. So you can, if feeling so resilient, you can call in and say, I don't think I can work today. But at the same time, we've also used different platforms to bring people together. So we have had a virtual away day. We normally would have one in the summer. Still did that, and although it was challenging, actually I'd hope the feedback was quite good from it. But what we did make sure we did was we brought in some of our beneficiaries, and we brought in that storytelling into that away day to make sure that people still can see the impact they're having on the front line and the impact on beneficiaries, because that's ultimately why we're all here as fundraisers. We want to make that difference, and it's so important that you really continue to communicate that story, and where possible, try connect the team with those beneficiaries. And we've tried to do that in lots of different ways, but also celebrate the milestones, celebrate the small things day to day, and celebrate the big things as well. So
right. No, and I think in terms of just, Anna, what you touched on there around as you've managed for longer, like you've developed or brought more of your authentic self to that, for new managers that are with us today who maybe have kind of understood that professional management in terms of one-to-one personal development plans, that kind of thing, what advice would you give to them, to their teams now, in terms of bringing out that more authentic self but softly, because they can't obviously come in one day to the next and be completely different? So what was the first step that you took to kind of being more authentic and in your management style?
To be honest, I think it's quite a hard thing to pinpoint. I think a lot of it is a natural progression. As you become more confident in your professional side of things, so you become more confident in your ability to manage, it becomes easier to relax and to bring a bit more of yourself into. I mean, the best advice I can give you is the dog that I have, and not everyone's going to have a dog, but I think for me, like bringing the dog into the office and people, how I am with my animal, it just sort of shows you as a more rounded human being. So in the same vein, if you've got friends and family, if you have, obviously you don't at the moment, but when you have staff prices, stuff with +1s, if you can get your partners come along or friends come along, it's just sort of rounding people out a little bit more. So they're not just the leader, not just the CEO or whatever, but that they've got a couple of kids, and so that they're a bit soft-hearted when it comes to their kids or whatever. I think it just starts to round people out a bit more. But I think it is a hard one, and it's one that it's really easy to get wrong by bringing too much quickly, like you say, particularly if it is relating to how you feel and who you are. And I suspect we've probably all had that manager who spent all of our one-to-one talking about themselves and how they were and what their pressures were on the job. Or maybe that's just me, but I've had a few managers like that. So I think, it's in terms of small steps for right now, I would just share something slightly crap about your day and something good about your day. So if you found it really hard to get motivated this morning, but then you can swing it this afternoon, express that. when you're talking to somebody in a one-to-one, or if you made yourself an awful lunch, just something small like that, just to really keep open up the conversation a little bit, so people feel that they can express a little bit more about the things that have gone wrong.
Yeah, no, I definitely, my team love it when I say that I've made a mistake. They love it so much. I think it's that kind of humanizing, isn't it? Of like, just because you're leading doesn't mean you're perfect or flawless.
Well, and if someone's corrected you on something and they got it right, tell them and tell the team. They're like, do you know what? James is my next thing. I was like, James, like, completely nailed this. I got it entirely wrong.
Yeah,
it's good to know.
Hard letting that ego down, isn't it? Okay, and in terms of, I know we've had one question from Gina here. So, Caroline, in terms of motivating staff whilst they're working from home, what key things have you kind of done to keep your team motivated? You mentioned obviously utilising beneficiaries and bringing it back to them. Anything else?
I guess it comes back to, we talked about some of that celebrating success, and marking the small things as much as kind of the money. So, whether it be kind of specific activities that build towards something, I think that's been really key. So we've had one of the ways we've come together, and it kind of overlaps with, I guess, one of the key learnings that's worked well for us during COVID is having more of a campaign cohesive type approach across teams. So making sure that we bring people together and they can hear those kind of small wins on a regular basis and learn from each other, and hear some of the challenges, but how people are overcoming challenges, and by working together, that is keeping people more motivated, being able to problem solve, and rather than feel like they're on their own. And it's trying to replicate, I guess, in a way, isn't it, that water cooler conversation in ways. It's very hard to do that, isn't it? And so that's where a lot of people get maybe their energy from in an office, is bouncing ideas around. And so having more of those kind of forums to be able to do that, as well as more structured meetings. But really, I guess, Anna talked about as well, it's making sure that there is fun in the day where possible. At the end of that away day that we did, we had the most bizarre murder mystery, where there was a group of actors on screen and acted out a murder mystery to us all. And it was the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced in my life, but it was something that we were able to all talk about and connect with as well. So, that was it. But I think, coming back to that motivation, it is giving people kind of that flexibility to find what motivates them and give them the time in their day to do that. So whether it be have a longer conversation with a donor, or if they do get to talk to someone, a beneficiary or someone at the hospital, but also just sharing information as much as possible, real time. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I think that's something that we started to learn. Actually, I was starting to get notes or bits and pieces, maybe emails, or just not very maybe professional looking updates from the hospital, because that's, they were so busy. But actually sharing that was okay, because normally we'd have a different standard, but actually sharing that with donors and that real life actually from the edge was okay, and it showed them that that's enough as well right now, and good is good enough. So yeah.
Great. Okay. And in terms of developing and retaining staff, so I mean, everyone's had kind of recruitment freezes in place, and people that perhaps would be able to get pay rises or progress their careers, that's on hold in a lot of organisations. So Anna, how are you retaining and developing your staff whilst perhaps not having promotions and pay rises to be able to offer them?
I think that's the hardest part at the moment, because there just isn't there's not the money, but there's also just not the same opportunity as there might have been previously to progress people. To a large extent, they get it, certainly in terms of their currently pay freeze. But I think the benefit there is that Calm has been good at rewarding people previously. So I've certainly, again, worked at organisations, there's already been pay freezes for 3 years. So it's like, oh, what a shock, there's another pay freeze. Whereas if you have a history of supporting your staff and being able to remunerate them better over the years, that does help. I think the only thing you can do at the moment is give people opportunity rather than remuneration. So when there are new projects or new initiatives, get a wider team involved in it, give more junior people an opportunity to step up. Because half the time it's okay if they don't get it right. I've got one of the team running her first workshop in a couple of weeks, and it's an hour-long workshop for a few members of the team. And you know what? If she does a rubbish job, that's fine. She'll learn from it. It's only an hour of a few people's time. It's not the end of the world if she doesn't get it bang on first time. So I think it's just accepting and enabling them to make mistakes when they do give things a bash, but just giving them much more opportunity than they normally get, and acknowledge that they have opportunity rather than anything else at the moment. To say, look, we know that we can't give you any more money at the moment. You understand why. This is what we're going to do instead, to do the best that we can by you in order to give you a more rounded experience, or to give you better experience. So yeah, I think that's probably the hardest questions at the moment.
Yeah, it is, especially when we've seen a trend, I think, over the last 4 years of people jumping quite quickly or getting pay rises or promotions quite quickly. So it's definitely a challenge. Caroline, what are your thoughts on that?
I guess similar to Anna, it is about giving people opportunity to take on new roles, responsibilities, but also to try new things. So I would say maybe there have been some ideas or projects that have been on the back burner for a while, and we've said, actually, now is a good time. Let's look at now things have calmed down a little bit. Let's give people an opportunity to really move forward some more strategic projects. We've been looking at obviously a renewed focus on our supporter journey in particular, and what opportunities for innovation that might bring. Obviously within our particularly kind of front-facing mass giving teams like our events and community team, how can we make some of our offering more virtual? That's something they've wanted to try for a while, some more of our digital streams. So really giving people that opportunity and flexibility and budget, within an income budget to go do that. And also I would say maybe time to network and learn from others, and saying, get out there, there's so many people who want to talk to each other, there's so much expertise. Use this as an opportunity to do lots of the free webinars that are out there, like all of the ones you've been doing, Ashby, have been brilliant. But how do you learn from others and really build up that network? That's so important.
Yeah, and on that, if there's anyone that is struggling to find those kind of networks by themselves, just let me know, because we run a mentoring scheme where we introduce and facilitate introductions. So happy to do that for anyone that's struggling. We've had an interesting question. So what do you do, this from Catherine, what do you do when you have team members that might not get along? How do you bring them together? Who wants to take that one first? Do you want to go first, Anna?
I was hoping you wouldn't pick out that question.
I was like, well, I thought it was. I love the controversial one, so that's.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, I'm probably a little bit more hard-nosed about these things than perhaps other people would be, which may not be right. But I think the thing to always remind people of, regardless of whether they get on or not, is that they are colleagues first. They've come together to do a job. So whether they're mates or not outside of that is kind of not that relevant. I mean, it can obviously help, and it can, particularly when you're more junior, and particularly, I live in London, you first move to London, you don't know anybody. It can be wonderful to have people you get on well with at work and that you socialise at work. But it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the role that they're there to do. As much as possible, I encourage people to, or try and get people to solve issues themselves. I'm not going to be the sounding board for one team member complaining about another team member. I'm just going to tell them to talk to each other. And if they absolutely can't resolve it between them, I may mediate or be part of that conversation. But by and large, they really do have to sort it out themselves, presuming that everybody works with adults. So they should be able to behave like adults. And a lot of that comes down to your sort of people and culture, your HR approach, and if there are behavioural guidelines for how the team are expected to behave when they're working together, that can help. But I think it has to be something that we encourage teams to sort out for themselves if they actually just don't get on. If it's more about people just not feeling very cohesive because they perhaps not worked together very long or work in silos, that's much nicer problem to have. And a lot of that can just be about, just having conversations where everyone's in it together and talking about the stuff that they're doing, but also identifying opportunities to bring different things together. So if there's a particular project going on which actually could benefit from a point of view of somebody else, trying to bring them in, even if it doesn't directly relate to their job at the time. So if somebody used to work as an events manager, but they're currently your philanthropy manager, and someone in Challengers trying to put on their first event, get them involved, get them to go over and, and consult on that, or to read over a couple of documents that someone's produced, so you don't have to sort of stick within the streams of their current job role anyway.
Right.
But yeah, I'm possibly, Caroline might have better advice, but I'm more of the, you guys need to get on because it's work.
No, that's fine. Caroline, what would you say then? Are you going to come in with something different and softer? Or
yeah, you're going to be more helpful.
No, I would say it's one of my great learnings as a leader, and something that I guess a lot of people, it's your frog that you don't want to eat, isn't it? Giving and receiving feedback. And that is something that you have to learn to become not necessarily more comfortable at, but that you have to learn to tackle head on, because ultimately, if you do it in a supportive way, and you know the reason why you're doing it, which is ultimately for our beneficiaries to raise more money, and really have that impact. If you're being authentic, I think it's much easier to have that conversation, but encouraging people, I guess, to work together and give and receive that feedback directly is very important as a leader, because you're not here as that intermediary. You yes, obviously you can step in, but it is about encouraging and empowering people to have those leadership conversations themselves, and that's what it's about. What I would say is that, it's not been perfect. It's been difficult for us. People have been really stressed. We've had a lot of work to do. People have been really overworked, in our organization, and some people have just stepped up brilliantly. But we have recognized that there's already been learnings from that over the last 4 months. So what we've done is actually we used July in particular to really take a step back and go back to basics. So we started to go back and really look at actually, where did things fall down when we came under pressure? So looking at processes and agreed ways of working. And actually, we had lots of team members that came in during COVID. I've had 2 major gift fundraisers start in lockdown. I've not met them face to face. But more widely, just not assuming that people know the systems and the processes because they're new. And actually, when people's backs are against the wall, some of that can really help actually, but it can also really hinder. So actually, let's reevaluate. Let's look at what works and what doesn't work. And so we're doing that right now. But also, we've refreshed our plans. So we've taken a fresh look at our plans for the year ahead and said, actually, how do we work together? Where are the dependencies? And actually, what could we do with more support in? And kind of tweaked and adjusted those plans and the resources we put in different areas. So it's really about stopping and listening to each other. And then as a leader, what can I do to actually move this conversation on? So where can I make those decisions around replacing or moving resource to help alleviate some of those challenges and find solutions that we can all work on together. And yes, obviously there's all the team building aspect as well, but ultimately it is remembering why we're here. And if we do remember the why, I think it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, there's we did a webinar actually a couple of weeks ago on using personality profiles and how to get teams to fit within each other. So it might just be worth looking on that as well, because there's some interesting stuff that people can identify which colours they are and how they can work better within other teams. So
and I think, is it Lucy Gower that does some of the personality profiling? I think it's 64 personalities she uses. It's a website. I think I've used it with some of my teams before. It's really good. I think it's free actually. So yeah.
Yeah, 16 personalities. I've sent that round before as well.
Yeah.
And also Carol here has mentioned something about having a team charter. We don't have a team charter, but we have fundraising principles. So things that we all hold to be true in the way that we work. A lot of that reflects on how we work externally. But then if we've got those things in common, then you've got that immediately, that commonality between people, even if they don't see eye to eye or they don't work in the same way. Yeah. So I think that's quite an interesting solution too.
Great. Okay, perfect. And in terms of attributes that have made you successful leaders, Caroline, maybe we'll start with you on this one. In terms of what would you pick out as kind of 2 attributes that you've had to work on developing and building throughout your career, and how did you do that for other people that are looking at developing themselves?
I guess it's really it's listening.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to ultimately listen to your team, to supporters, to donors. if you don't stop and listen, you're not actually going to be able to hear what they're telling you. So it's not always about what you know, it's about building a team of experts around you. I think when you do develop as a leader and you progress, you have to ultimately accept that there are going to be people in your team that are a lot better at doing things than you are. But you're there to lead the way. And so it's, again, how can you empower those team members? So it's ultimately about listening to what they need and leading them through the I guess all of the challenges maybe that they have. But what I would say is, you know, I've done lots of leadership training and courses over the years. And I do think it is about showing up. I think it's about being consistent. It is about being yourself as much as possible, being authentic. I try to be, a lot of people that know me, I try to be quite honest and forthright. So what you see is what you get with me. But I ultimately also like to move on. I don't hold things on. I like to give people a second chance and say, let's find a better way of doing this together, and how can I support you to do that? But I think also, just probably touching on, we are female leaders here today. Confidence can be an issue. You have to have confidence in yourself and find ways to build that confidence. And one of the ways that I've done that, which I find very helpful, particularly as I've taken on more director roles and liaising with obviously very senior people and trustees, and trying to build trust and confidence in yourself, or that relationship between the two, is taking on roles outside of your job that help you build the confidence in different ways. So one thing I've done is obviously volunteering with other organizations, but also I found it really helpful in that giving and receiving feedback. How do you do that in a really constructive, confident, professional way? And one of the ways I've done that is actually by joining a Toastmasters club. So Toastmasters is a public speaking and leadership a worldwide organisation. There are 50 clubs in London. They are all virtual at the moment. You can join free and be a guest, so I would encourage people to go do that. So it gives you an opportunity to not only hone your public speaking skills, but also in evaluating and constructing feedback. It also is a way to volunteer. They have committees. There's a real social side to them. It's really helped me in not only building that confidence, giving feedback, presenting new information, new ideas, researching, but also building my network and meeting a fabulous group of people that are all very like-minded as well. And I would really recommend not just Toastmasters, but there are other ways that you can do that outside of work. So find a way to build your confidence, and that will really help.
Perfect, that's great. I've never heard of that before. I'll have a little look. And Anna, what two attributes have you had to develop over the years to make you a strong leader?
Caroline covered a lot there. I'm not sure that there's much left. I think the thing that sticks out to me, that if you're worried about being a good leader and want to be a good leader, that's a good start. Yeah. Because it's probably the people who think they're doing a great job of it and aren't thinking about it at all going to be struggling.
That's the same thing that I find when I'm interviewing fundraisers as well. Those ones that are always really keen to learn are the ones that are normally the ones that go further. So that's interesting.
Yeah, totally. The first thing for me over the years was emulating. So on the sadly rare occasions that I would have good leaders, like thinking about it a bit and thinking about what are the behaviours that they're exhibiting that are making me feel more confident in them, that are making me feel safe in my role, that make me feel motivated to do what I need to do. So I think, but then equally with the bad ones, just again thinking about what they're doing. So I think really being able to reflect on that rather than just letting it wash over you and thinking, oh yeah, they were great. Actually, why were they great? What were the things that they did? What were the things that they said? How did they behave in a way that made you feel positively towards them and made you feel confident in their leadership? The second thing, if somebody does give you feedback, particularly management, listen to it. Like sometimes our knee-jerk reaction is like, no, I don't do that. I'm totally fine. But certainly that's my knee-jerk reaction. Other people then might worry about it far more than I would. But listen to the feedback and think about how you can change those behaviours. A lot of it is about emotional intelligence, just really understanding yourself. And the third thing I would say is, this is very calm, very well-being, but make sure that you're as well as you can be. Because if you're not well physically or emotionally or in any respect, and you're coming into work, you're not going to be doing as good a job as you would if you're well. So make sure that you're looking after yourself, because you have to look after yourself first and foremost so that you can look after your team. So if you're not well, your team are definitely going to pick up on that, and they're definitely going to feel worse, and they're going to struggle if you're coming in with your unwellness in some form or another. So if you can make sure that you're looking after yourself, that you're getting support you need from management, from the people either side of you, from people outside of work, etc., then you're going to bring all of that along with you when you manage a team.
That's really interesting, because I think one of the things that I've definitely been focusing on for people I'm meeting over the last year and a half is what makes you happy in your roles, because often we see people pushing themselves into more senior positions when actually they might not really enjoy line management, or they might want to specialize in one income stream. And I think that kind of happiness and having that awareness that if you don't enjoy managing, don't force yourself into it. I think the sector is getting better at creating those structures where there's principal gifts leads who have really high value donors but don't necessarily line manage. But yeah, I think it's really nice to see that kind of well-being. So I think everyone should take that into account. And then just in terms of, so I know there's been some specific questions about income streams, so what I'll do at the end of this is just CC Caroline and Anna into the wrap-up email so that you can reach out to them directly for a bit more advice on that. There's an interesting one that I think is very pressing at the moment. I think that was from Tom. So around people are obviously, with the decreases in headcount in fundraising teams through restructures, people are obviously having to start to take on new income streams that perhaps they've not had loads of awareness. You've obviously both led across multiple income streams. Starting with you, Anna, what advice would you give to someone who's stepping up and managing someone who is looking after an area that they might not have any experience in?
The first key is to get to know them. So make sure that you are having real conversation with them, understanding both them as an individual, but also just asking them about the work. It's okay that you don't know their job. There are specialisms in this world, and we're not going to know how to do everything, like Caroline was saying earlier. Your team are going to be better at you than some things, and that's okay. And I think sometimes they like to know that. They like to know that they're the expert in that, and that you're going to represent them, and you're going to support them, and you're going to help them achieve all the things they can achieve. But they're going to know more about major gifts than you, and that's okay. So I think it would, in the first instance, if it was happening tomorrow, I'd be making sure that I really got to understand what they're doing, but and also what the challenges they do. Like people, one of the best things I think you can do when you're first coming in to manage somebody is really understand what are the things that are getting in their way, and are they you can help with and solve, or are they just part of the job? But also I wouldn't try not to worry too much about not knowing all of the things that everybody knows how to do, and acknowledge sometimes that you don't. Even down to small things like not knowing how to do something on the database because you've not done it in 5 years. That's okay. Ask for help. Ask for them to show you, so that you can show that you're actively trying to learn your team as well as also lead them.
Great. Yeah, and again, for Tom in particular, if you want us to find you a mentor in one of the new areas that you've not worked in, just let me know at the end of this. Sorry if I've just preempted something you were going to say, Caroline. What would your advice be to someone that's managing an income stream they've not got exposure of previously?
You read my mind.
It's good, we're connected.
Yes, yeah. But actually, I've done it myself. So one of the experiences we had, very unusual experiences, was particularly for Evelina London, we had a viral campaign. So we had little Tony Hudgell. I think some of you may have seen him. He vowed to walk 10K through June on his new prosthetic legs. He was inspired by Captain Tom. He is now the second biggest ever fundraiser on Just Giving after Captain Tom. So we raised 1.5 million in 30 days. We'd never had a viral campaign like that before. And so what did I do? I picked up the phone and I spoke to Teenage Cancer Trust around Stephen. And I said, what can we learn from you guys? This has never happened to us before. So I do it as well. I pick up the phone, I reach out to people. People, as I said, at the moment, the charity sector is so supportive of each other, and actually in general, people are just more than happy to support and share insight and advice where possible. So I would absolutely say reach out and talk to other people. And yet finding a mentor is really, really, I think it's really important. It's really helped me in my career. Having an independent, different voice to give you a different opinion and perspective on things is really important.
Yeah, Right. No, and what we'll do at the end of this, and I'm just mindful of time, we're probably coming up now, so I'll we'll end the questions there. So following this, I will just send round a wrap-up email. As I said, I'll CC Anna and Caroline in. Obviously, they're both leading teams at the moment, and it's not all, you know, all perfect sailing. So please be mindful of their time. But if you've got follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. I will also attach the chat, because I know a couple of you have offered to help each other on there, which is lovely. Thanks, Dan, in particular. And if you've enjoyed today, we'd really love you to post about it on LinkedIn. I will send through the recording afterwards, and everything goes on our YouTube channel. Sounds like a very 2000s ask, but if you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be great. I feel like
should be on TikTok.
Yeah, maybe I'll set up a TikTok, you know, we'll get really trendy. And yes, and as mentioned, obviously, massive thank you so much to Caroline and Anna. Thank you both for coming on and sharing your expertise, and keep doing the great stuff you're doing. It's lovely to hear people being recommended by people that they've been managed by previously, and it is a much rarer occurrence, so I was delighted to be put in touch with both of you. And yes, so yeah, and obviously, as I said, we're a recruitment agency, so if you need anything recruitment wise, you know where we are. And our next webinar is on the 3rd of September and is around reintegrating furloughed staff, onboarding and building team rapport remotely. So some of you might want to follow on to that as well. But lovely, thanks so much for joining, everyone. Bye everyone, bye.
Thanks.